Today on Inside Utah Politics, is education funding at risk as state leaders consider tax reform? Should Congress begin impeachment proceedings against President Trump? We'll be digging into those questions and more with Salt Lake Tribune columnist Robert Gehrke. And Utah Senator Mitt Romney sounds the alarm in his first speech from the Senate floor. The country, he says, is poised to take over as America's #1 adversary.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Good Sunday morning, and thanks so much for joining us for Inside Utah Politics. I'm Glenn Mills. We begin this morning with Salt Lake Tribune columnist Robert Gehrke. Robert, great to have you back on the show. Always glad to have you with us.
Yeah, good to see you.
All right, plenty to talk about. There's no lack in Utah politics that way. Let's start with education funding, because we're going through this tax reform process. It's kind of a convoluted backstory on taxes in Utah and how they're limited and whatnot, but you make the argument that we shouldn't be taking away from our already underfunded schools as we go through this process.
Right.
Set that up for us.
Right. So the easiest way to envision this is the state budget's divided into two buckets. You've got the income tax bucket, and all of that under the Constitution goes to public and higher education, and the other bucket is the sales tax bucket. And all of that goes into things like social services, public safety, corrections, courts, things like that. It pays for basically everything else. And that's the way it's always worked. And the issue right now, in some legislators' eyes, is that the income tax bucket is being filled too fast, whereas the sales tax bucket isn't being filled fast enough. And so they want to look at getting rid of this earmark in the Constitution, sending all of that income tax to education. It's been that way since 1931 when he instituted the income tax. In '96, the higher ed was added to it. So Senator Kurt Bramble has a bill file open that would get rid of the amended Constitution, get rid of that earmark, and then they can use all of the money. Instead of having two buckets, they'll just dump it all into one big trough and divvy it up that way. The problem with that becomes, we're already last in the country in education funding, per pupil education funding. And if you take away the guaranteed revenue stream for education, I think then you're trusting legislators to make sure education is properly funded. And it hasn't been already. If they want to put more money into it, they can now. But this only frees up their hands to put less money into it and divert that money into other places.
You also mentioned the fact, though, that they've put billions of dollars into education over the last 4 years. How much more can you divert to education? Well,
I mean, they put 1.1 billion into education in the last 4 years in new money, but that's because they have to, because the Constitution says the income tax has to go to education. And so, so we've had good economic growth, we've had good job growth, and so all of that money's been going into education. The problem that they really need to address is this imbalance, this structural problem with the sales tax, because right now we're buying fewer things, but we're also not paying sales tax on things like car washes and Lyft rides, attorneys, doctors, things like that. We don't pay sales tax on, and that's more and more of our economy now. So, but to address that, they've got to have the political courage, I guess, to take on the big lobbyists like they represent the attorneys, the realtors, and the doctors.
And we even saw small business owners coming together in groups, really opposing what was presented during the session.
Sure. If you're not paying the tax now, you don't want to pay the tax in the future. And so, but there is a fairness question too. Why do we tax some services and not others? Why do we tax dry cleaners, for example, but not cosmetic surgeons?
We always hear the governor say, yes, we have that dubious distinction, but look at our results. He argues that we're getting the good results.
And I think there's something to that. Like, to be fair, we have great teachers. We have who do really good work. They don't get paid what they should, but they do it anyway for other reasons. If you compare us to other states that have high per pupil spending, we do better than some of them. But if you compare us to states that have similar demographics, we are sort of in the middle of the road. And at the end of the day, we can do better. And this is the priority, the #1 priority for voters in poll after poll after poll. And so to start saying, well, we don't necessarily want to make sure it's taken care of, I think would be the wrong way to go.
I've kind of lived in both ends of the spectrum. My kids have mostly been educated here in the state of Utah, but I've also lived in one of the top states. If I'm being honest, I wouldn't say I really noticed much of a difference in the education they received in both states, but there was a clear difference in the teachers' attitudes in the other state because they were paid well and they felt like they were respected.
Well, and we have a real problem right now too in this state because we're seeing in the Salt Lake City School District negotiations breaking down as the teachers are trying to come up with a new contract. And the district has limited resources, and the teachers say we've been underpaid for long enough, the economy is good, we can take our skills elsewhere if you don't want to pay us. And so it's coming to a head, I think, here pretty shortly.
Yeah, I guess I should also mention in that other state I lived in, I certainly noticed the taxes coming out
Yeah.
more out of my paycheck as
Yeah.
well. Okay, Mueller report and President Trump. You say this was an issue you wanted to steer clear of for quite a while, but now you say you make the argument that it's time for Congress to begin the impeachment proceedings. Why is that?
Yeah, I guess I was on the fence for a long time because like you, I lived through the Bill Clinton impeachment, and it was a pretty brutal process, and it was a very political process. And I think going back down that road is not something you take on lightly.
Sure.
But I felt like after the special counsel made his statement a couple weeks ago saying, he can't charge the president. It's up to Congress to be responsible for, policing the president. And then, so Congress decided, well, we're going to issue subpoenas. We want to have testimony. But the administration has resisted that every step of the way. The only tool they have left at this point is to initiate an impeachment inquiry, and that strengthens their hand in terms of getting the information that they need to get in order to answer the question that I think Americans deserve to have answered. And maybe at the end of the day it doesn't make any difference because, as I said in the column, obviously the Republican Senate is not inclined to actually expel the president or censure the president. But at the very least, we can get the information. The Mueller report took us down to the 2-yard line, to use the old football metaphor, and he said he couldn't get it across the goal line, and I think this is the only avenue to do that.
One interesting thing I wanted to bring up real quick. It's one thing to say our Republicans are saying, standing against impeachment, but our Democrat. Our lone Democrat, and I understand it's politically expedient for him to take that, but he has even said, look, the bar is really high for impeachment, and I don't believe it reaches that bar.
Yeah, and it's been interesting because we've even seen some Republicans in the House saying that they would support impeachment, and Representative McAdams, it's a legitimate argument that we don't want to venture down that road. The question has been answered. People can read the report if they want to read the report and draw their own conclusions. But at the same time, Congress has a job under the Constitution, and that is to, in instances where there are high crimes and misdemeanors, to impeach the president. And one thing I want to be clear of, I'm not saying that we start an impeachment process and the next day, the House is passing articles of impeachment and the Senate's voting. This is a process. It's an inquiry, and so it would necessitate getting documents, calling witnesses, calling legal experts to opine about whether you can obstruct justice if there's not an underlying crime. So I think those are they're important questions, and for Congress to punt on that, I think, is the wrong way to go.
Okay, we have about a minute left. I want to bring this up real quick. Medicaid expansion. We're going through the public comment process right now for the latest waiver.
Yeah.
You make an argument that what's happening in Utah could have a negative impact across the country.
Right, because when we passed Proposition 3, voters made clear that they wanted a clean Medicaid expansion. The legislature monkeyed with that. Now they're going to the Trump administration to say, okay, we'll take less money per patient, but we want to be able to cap enrollment. They're already covering 60,000 fewer people. That's not what the voters voted for. And the Trump administration, if they allow those caps to go into place, plus the work requirement that they've already approved, if they allow those caps to go into place, it sets a precedent for other states to follow, and dramatically undermines the Medicaid expansion that has helped tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people across the country. And you've also got this situation where this is something that the Trump administration has made clear for a long time that they've wanted to do, these caps, that they've wanted those caps in place because they think it'll save a lot of money. But you can't save the money unless you're covering fewer people or providing them less coverage. And so that's what this is really about. They're trying to get something administratively through this Utah waiver that they couldn't get through Congress in the past.
All right, we'll watch to see how that plays out. Always great having you on the show. Where can our viewers follow you at?
You can find me at Robert Gerke on Twitter or anywhere at sltrib.com.
Okay, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Still to come, new developments in the race for governor in 2020. Former Congressman Jason Chaffetz officially bowing out. Our panel will weigh in on that race. But first, another mass shooting ignites talk about universal background checks, the latest from our nation's capital after the break. All eyes were on a senator from Utah on Tuesday as he made his maiden speech on the floor of the U.S. Senate. Senator Mitt Romney discussed his first few months in office, touted our state, and sent a warning about what he sees as a major threat. With about 5 months under his belt, the Senate spotlight turned to Senator Mitt Romney.
I recognize the senator from Utah.
In his first speech on the floor of the U.S. Senate, Romney said the Washington environment isn't the hostile one he expected.
The truth is that senators on both sides of the aisle are remarkably friendly and collegial once the cameras are off.
The senator says it's an honor to represent Utah and says our state is a leader on a national scale.
Our state has the fastest job growth in the country. It balances its budget every year, and it has the country's most highly educated workforce.
He also noted how Americans have come together to triumph, pointing to the Transcontinental Railroad as an example.
The decisions each generation of Americans make affect the course of history and profoundly impact our prosperity and our freedom. We face such decisions today.
Romney says that decision today is how we respond to China. As a presidential candidate, Romney warned Russia was our biggest adversary. Today, he says China is set to assume that role.
Imprisoning millions in re-education camps, brutally repressing dissent, censoring the media and the internet, seizing land and sea that don't belong to it, flouting the global rules of free and fair competition.
Romney warns China's economy and military could eclipse ours if the U.S. does not act. He's calling for stronger ties with our allies in both Europe and Asia to help confront the threat. The Virginia Beach shooting has prompted lawmakers to once again begin debating America's gun laws. The bill would expand federal background checks for the sale or transfer of almost every firearm, closing a loophole that allowed private gun sales to go unchecked. Washington correspondent Morgan Wright has the story.
Do not sit by and watch this slaughter continue.
Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy says he's fed up with Senate Republicans' complacency and refusal to address gun violence.
The background checks bill has been lingering, sitting on the Senate calendar for 100 days. In those 100 days, 10,000 people have been shot.
Democratic lawmakers want the Senate to take up H.R. 8, the universal background checks bill. Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal says there's no reason to avoid a vote.
My Republican colleagues cannot stand idly while their leader protects them.
Connecticut Congresswoman Johanna Hayes, whose congressional district was devastated by the mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School, urged the Senate to at least open a dialogue on the topic.
To have no answer for all of these kids who are asking, why are we doing nothing, is unconscionable.
According to a recent Quinnipiac poll, 97% of Americans polled support universal background checks. Democratic lawmakers say the Senate should act immediately.
Claiming that 97% of Americans support universal background checks is just false.
Lars Daleside with the NRA says Democrats just claim they're not coming for your guns.
Then they pass bills like H.R. 8, and you know that that's exactly what they're trying to do.
Democratic lawmakers maintain this is just a common sense piece of legislation that could help save lives. In Washington, Morgan Wright.
Coming up, the U.S. House passes a bill to protect dreamers. Utah's delegation split along party lines. Our panel debates after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Senator Todd Weiler and State Representative Brian King. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
All right, so Governor 2020, let's talk about that first. During the week we learned that former Congressman Jason Chaffetz is officially out. We've been hearing that for some time, but now it's official. How does that change the race as it stands right now?
Well, I think, I don't know that it changes because he was never officially in, but clearly that clears, I think, a path for the front runner right now, and that's Spencer Cox. We know that Greg Hughes is likely to jump in soon. We know that Jeff Birmingham from Utah County is going to jump in, and probably several others, including maybe Rob Bishop. And remember, Glenn, if this is a jungle Republican primary with 4 or 5 or 6 names on the ballot, you could win that primary with 25 or 30% of the vote. So that's why someone like a Rob Bishop or a Jason Chaffetz, who we know is out, would be a threat to anybody, because they've been around for so long. They've got that name ID. They don't have to buy it.
How do you see it changing the race?
I think that the absence of Chaffetz from the race opens the door for more people to the right of Spencer Cox. Spencer Cox is the front runner right now, I think.
And the only official candidate at this point, we should say.
Right, but he's clearly the one who is capturing a moderate or more pragmatic Republican vote. What the elimination of Chaffetz from consideration does is it allows the door to open more widely for more conservative Republicans to step in, whether it's Greg Hughes, whether it's Rob Bishop, or whether it's somebody else. And there will be other candidates, of course, step up. So I think it's good news for a guy like Greg.
Okay, so we've mentioned some of the possible names that could still get in, and there's this big one, by the way, the 800-pound gorilla sitting in the room.
John Huntsman Jr., yeah.
So he's really considering this.
Yeah.
If he gets in, how does that change this race?
That is that shifts the landscape, I think, significantly in his favor. Just because A, of his name ID, B, his experience. He's been elected twice before. He's very charismatic, very likable. 100% name ID, among likely voters. So I think he would become instantly the front runner.
Okay. Your thoughts on that?
This is where SB 56 really makes a difference
54?
in Utah politics. 54. The alternate route to the ballot. This is where signature gathering makes a difference, because I don't think there's any way that John Huntsman Jr. could get through a caucus or a convention with Republicans. They don't care for him at this point. I don't think they trust him. He worked for the Obama administration after all. But what you have is Utahns who have a lot of affection for John Huntsman Sr., of course, and for the Huntsman family generally, and a lot of people who look back on both sides of the aisle with fondness on John Huntsman Jr.'s term as governor, his term and a portion of the second term as governor. And so I do think that having an alternate route to the ballot is the thing that makes a difference here.
Well, and weigh in on that, because he does make some decent points. Well, you always make good points, I'll say. I should make some decent points.
Thank you.
But Governor Huntsman did leave early in his second term.
Yeah.
He went to work for the Obama administration.
Yeah.
Does leaving office hurt his chances if he does want to come back?
I think it would
again?
hurt Chaffetz more, because Chaffetz left for a paycheck from Fox News. Huntsman left because the President of the United States said, I need you in China. And I also think, Huntsman spoke Chinese, and Huntsman's now served with Obama as an ambassador, with, I think, Bush, and also now with Trump. And so I don't think it hurts Huntsman. Plus, it was long enough ago, and Gary Herbert was very popular. But here's what to watch for. If this race a year from now is Huntsman, Cox, and Greg Hughes, and everybody else has dropped out, or is really a non-factor, what if Cox and Huntsman split the moderate vote, and that leaves an opening for Hughes to come in, as not splitting the vote with anybody else?
Or if not Hughes, Rob Bishop, something like that.
Or Rob Bishop, or Jeff Birmingham.
Okay, so we spent all this time talking about Republican candidates for 2020. Do you have your eye on anyone on the Democratic side?
Well, I think there's some good Democrats that could run. Scott Howell, former state senator, is good.
Pat Jones?
Pat Jones is a former state senator.
I don't think Pat
will
run, but she'd be great. She'd be great.
There are some other folks who've, Karen Hale, Karen Morgan. Here's the challenge that you have as a Democrat thinking about running for governor in the state of Utah. Costs a lot of money, takes a lot of energy. You'd have to leave your occupation, whatever it is. And the likelihood that a Democrat can win in a statewide election is very unproven.
Don't we have to go back to like the 90s before we?
Yeah, I think Jan Graham probably
is
the Attorney General. So it's been about 20 years.
And that's a different race than governor.
Yeah, it is.
There's no viable path for a Democrat. Michael Weinholz showed that, 4 years ago, 3 years ago.
Great candidate in terms of.
Great candidates, had a lot of, business
had
experience.
Money, had business experience. Yeah. So that's the challenge.
The joke that I hear among Republicans is if you have Cox and Huntsman in the race, you don't need a Democrat.
Well, see, but that's the problem in the sense that when you don't have two competitive parties, it hurts good public policy in Utah. It hurts Utahns in terms of them having a meaningful choice. What we need is, Democrats stepping up and more people being willing to vote for Democrats, good quality Democrats, not just any old Democrat. You got to have a good quality
One
Democrats.
thing before we move on to this, as I mentioned, Spencer Cox is the only official candidate in the race so far. Did he jump in the race too early?
I think he jumped in a little bit too early, but I think he wanted to get that out in front get that fundraising advantage. And he started this brilliant tour. He's going to visit every city in town and nook and cranny of Utah and do a service project. I think he's going to get a lot of earned media, free press. I don't think he'll be able to outspend Jeff Birmingham, and maybe not even outspend Greg Hughes, but I think he can out-campaign them.
I think it's very smart for him to get him early. And here's why. He's going to have, until somebody else jumps in, he's got free reign to run around the state and talk to people.
There's no doubt he's building momentum.
Plus, he's the lieutenant governor. So, the governor had an energy summit, recently, and even though the governor was there, Spencer Cox spoke. A lot of influential people there, a lot of potential donors there, and that will continue.
Okay, let's move on to the American Dream and Promise Act. Congress, the House actually passing that. As far as the Utah delegation goes, it went across party lines. Ben McAdams, the only one in our delegation voting for that.
Yeah, it's really surprising to me that we didn't have somebody on the Republican side. This is basically the successor act to provide a pathway to citizenship for the dreamers, for individuals who were born in another country but came here at a very early age, many times have always thought of themselves as purely American, and yet they aren't citizens. And there, I think, is a very strong feeling, rightly so, across the state for the need to put these folks into a citizenship position. And it's the Utah Compact. This has strong support, and yet all the Republicans voted up against it.
Senator, this is something Utahns have shown that they stand behind as the dreamers, so why didn't we see a Republican?
So I think you saw the Republicans go against it for one reason. This bill put dreamers with criminal records above to the front of the line in front of everybody without criminal records who had been waiting patiently their turn, and this kind of jumped the line. So I think if it was a pure Dreamers Act without that component, I think you would have seen a John Curtis and others vote for that. But I think it was the way it was drafted, and it was intentional. The Democrats wanted the Republicans to vote against this so they could use it as a campaign issue.
So why are we going to be able to see the both sides come together on an act that can move forward? Or does this just show that's not going to happen?
I'd love to think that could happen. It's a tough political environment in D.C. these days. You have the Senate, of course, and the House, and it's a Democratic House or Republican Senate. Divisiveness is just hard to overcome.
Yeah, I have to, unfortunately, because I'm a pro-dreamer, but unfortunately, if the House is going to pull these type of shenanigans, you're not going to see the Senate take up a bill, even if it passes the House. This type of bill. So.
A Morning Consult poll during the week showed President Trump's approval rating across the country, which was very high among likely GOP voters. But here in Utah, I want to break it down a little bit because his approval rating was down about 2 points to 49% from April to May. But the big thing is it's down 25% since taking office.
Yeah.
Why is he on that downward spiral in the state of Utah?
Because he shoots himself in the foot and he tweets stupid things, and he's got this Mueller report hanging over his head. But let's be clear. If President Trump is the Republican nominee in 2020, he will win Utah. The question is, will he win Michigan? Will he win Wisconsin? Will he win Pennsylvania? And he's down in those states. So I'm a lot more concerned about those 3 states as a Republican than I am about Utah, because the Republican nominee is going to carry Utah.
Do you agree with that? If Democrats can get someone who's a little more moderate?
Well,
could they be a challenge in the state
who
of
is that
Utah?
going to be?
I think the Democrats will have a much better candidate than Donald Trump.
Socialist
that's for sure.
light. So.
But what you'll see, I think, in Utah is a narrower margin than you'd expect for a state that's as conservative and red as Utah.
I would agree with that.
And I also think that what you're seeing is we're very tribal in our thinking, both on the left and the right. And what you see is a more long-term degradation of the brand that is the GOP by its association with Donald Trump. When you have 90% plus of Republicans saying, yeah, Donald Trump, this guy is on a glide path to disaster. I just don't see a way around that. One way or the other. It's hard for me to see him and his close association with Republicanism and the Republican Party's close association with him damaging.
We have about 20 seconds left. So I'll give you the final word.
Donald Trump is 2.5 years into his presidency, has the exact same approval rating as Barack Obama 2.5 years into his first term. And so anybody who's counting him out or thinking, I mean, he is who he is. We knew who he was when we voted for him or against him. And he hasn't, to his credit, he hasn't changed a bit. So I wish he would have changed a little bit. But,
all right. I'm going to have to end it on that note. Gentlemen, always a great conversation. Thanks so much for being here with us. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. Soon, Utah Democrats will gather for their state organizing convention. That is set for Saturday, June 22nd. We also have the municipal primary election coming up. That is on Tuesday, August 13th. Then the municipal general election will be Tuesday, November 5th. Make sure to connect with me on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues that are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Just log on and search Glenn Mills ABC4. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.